It's noon on the West Coast, 3 o'clock in Washington, where President Trump tweeted, "Tariffs are the greatest." But he's now spending billions and billions and billions of taxpayer dollars to ease some of the pain of those greatest tariffs. We're live at the White House. A new setback for hundreds of immigrant families separated at the border just days before the deadline to reunite all kids and parents. We're live in Texas. And a Republican congressman taking a historic stand to try to save the planet. He says it's time for a carbon tax. The Republican representative of Florida's 26th district joins us live. Let's get to it.
Now, Shepard Smith reporting live from the Fox News deck.
The White House says President Trump is threatening to remove the security clearances of 6 former federal officials who have spoken out about his refusal to confront Russia over President Vladimir Putin's attempts to interfere in the election that made Mr. Trump president. What's the point?
I think he's trolling people, honestly.
Of the presidentially trolled no longer even have security clearances. Analysts say this is likely a White House attempt to distract from unanswered questions about what happened in the closed-door meeting with Putin in Helsinki. Aside from the threat on which I just reported, unless and until the president actually acts, there is no more news here. Fox top story this hour, the migrant crisis on the southern border. Hundreds of immigrant parents separated from their children at the border are not in this country anymore. Breaking today, the feds revealing in court documents they may have deported more than 450 men and women without their children. 463 to be exact, out of the country without their kids. Government lawyers say the cases are under review. At issue, did the parents have the legal representation to know how to get their kids back? Attorneys for the American Civil Liberties Union say no. They point out those parents are in desperate need of legal help. They say many of them signed deportation forms but did not understand that they would be stranding their own children. This is a crisis of the administration's own making. The families were separated due to a policy that it enacted, not due to any law already on the books. The Trump administration has until Thursday to meet a federal judge's deadline to reunite all the children and parents that it separated. Casey Stiegel is live at our Southwest News Hub on Fox Top Story. Casey?
Yeah, and Shepard, and the numbers, in fact, could be even higher of people no longer in the United States with children who are still in U.S. custody. We're talking closer to 600 when you actually look at the paperwork and the stats, how it is all divided out. We want to show that to you because out of the 463 no longer in the United States, which the federal government notes is under review, it also shows, Shepard, 130 parents waived reunification, meaning signed paperwork acknowledging that they were being deported and leaving their child. So the court filing shows 64 then are ineligible because of things like a criminal record, and then another 260 cases require what's described as further evaluation. But frankly, what that evaluation is exactly and how were people removed from this country before their children, all questions that lawyers for the government will have to answer very soon. Shepard, a federal court hearing scheduled to get underway in the next few hours addressing this very issue out in California.
And a new development today about immediate deportations.
Yeah, and this could all be up in the air because the federal judge out in California just a few days ago actually praised the U.S. government, saying that it appeared they were going to be on track to meet Thursday's deadline. And now with this new information coming out in this filing, it could be up in the air, and an additional filing coming in at this late hour, Shepard. The Trump administration now moving for immediate deportation of some of these reunified families. In other words, once the reunion happens, go ahead and deport the family unit. And the administration in that court paperwork is citing space issues for the reasoning behind that. However, the government says that they are on track in terms of reuniting the majority of kids, they say. 870 some odd reunions have already been carried out. Another 530 are going to be happening, they say, any time. And then another 200 have already been released into the United States by ICE as they await their future court dates. But again, as you know, Shepard, a very fluid story and a lot of judicial action, injunctions being filed at the last minute by both sides trying to get this all sorted out.
Casey, thanks. A reminder, the government tells us many of those who were here are requesting asylum. That is not illegal. Requesting asylum is part of the American way. The tariffs are the greatest. That's the statement from the president today. Now some lawmakers in his own party are blasting what they call a bailout for some Americans hurt by those same tariffs. An administration announced a short-term plan to give farmers billions of dollars in aid after they took a big hit from retaliatory tariffs. Republican Senator Ben Sasse has released a statement that reads in part, "This trade war is cutting the legs out from under farmers, and White House's plan is to spend $12 billion on gold crutches." This administration's tariffs and bailouts aren't going to make America great again. They're just going to make it 1929 again. The House Speaker, Paul Ryan, says he's made it clear he does not believe tariffs are the right answer. But the president is standing by his import taxes.
You have to see these trade deals I'm working on. They're a disaster. The farmers will be the biggest beneficiary. Watch. We're opening up markets. You watch what's going to happen. Just be a little patient.
So far, they are not beneficiaries. The United States Trade Representative Office holding a hearing today with representatives from companies that could also take a hit from the tariffs. Let's bring in Ken Thomas, White House reporter for the Associated Press. What is the goal here?
The president is trying to buy some time, essentially. He's trying to help farmers, especially soybean producers, who have been hard hit by these retaliatory tariffs by China in response to the Trump tariffs. And he's trying to help them get through the next few months, in a short-term way to try to give him more time to negotiate deals, not only with China, but with the European Union and with Canada. This is something aimed at providing direct payments to farmers, buying up excess crops, trying to create trade markets. But as you say, a lot of Republicans will look at this and say, this is nothing but a government bailout.
And when he says the tariffs are the greatest, what is the White House saying to explain what he means by that?
The president and I believe the White House have always felt like tariffs are a very good negotiating tool. And he has felt that since he's slapped some of these tariffs on some of the U.S. trading partners, that has actually gotten these countries to the negotiating table. Tomorrow, we're going to have European Commission members coming to the White House talking about not only their dispute over steel and aluminum tariffs, which the president brought forth a few months ago, but this potential for a much larger dispute over automobiles. They're talking about, potentially a 20% tariff on imports from Europe. So that could cover things like BMWs and Mercedes and Volkswagens that are built over there and brought into the country. And, that's something that could really affect this country. There are a lot of people who would feel it in the pocketbooks when they look to buy a new car.
Free trade is a conservative principle, obviously. What are conservatives on the Hill saying in response?
They're not happy. I mean, they feel like tariffs are essentially taxes on American consumers, and they would like to see the president back away from this aggressive use of tariffs. That said, though, they do want to see better trade terms built. And so the president would argue, look, I just need some more time. I'm getting these countries to come to the table and negotiate, and pretty soon they'll cry uncle. But the question is, at what cost? In 6 months from now, are we going to see American consumers, cutting back their spending? Could this affect the economy? We just don't know. This is such an open-ended process right now, and we have these multiple fronts in Europe, in Mexico, and Canada, and of course with China. So it's just very hard to predict where this tariff fight, this trade fight is going to go.
Some of our viewers may go to the market and recognize that some of the crops or products from some of the crops that are grown in, let's say, Trump states have gone down in price, which may seem great, but there's a farmer out there or a manufacturer out there or somebody out there who's getting a lot less money for his or her products, and they're the ones who are voting in those all-important states, for instance, Iowa.
Absolutely. And the Chinese have been very strategic in how they have constructed these retaliatory tariffs. They've put it on products like soybeans and pork, and that's aimed at hurting the Trump base. I mean, a lot of these products are produced in the Midwest states that went with the president in 2016, and they're hoping to exact as much pain as possible so that maybe that will affect the president's mindset. We'll have to see how it goes.
Ken Thomas from the Associated Press. Thank you, Ken.
Thanks, Shep. 2
nights ago, President Trump tweeted in all caps a threat to the leader of Iran. Today, he's striking a somewhat different tone. The mixed signals, the back and forth between the Iranians and the American leader, and what it all could mean for the Middle East. That's coming up from the tensions escalating in the United States proxy war with Iran and Russia. Israel reports it shot down a Syrian fighter jet, and Syrian government forces backed by Russia and Iran have been advancing near the border with Israel as they drive out the rebels. The Israeli military claims a Syrian jet flew about a mile into Israeli airspace, but Syrian state media insist the pilot was over Syria the whole time. Russia and Iran are supporting the murderous dictator Bashar al-Assad, who uses chemical weapons on his own people, has murdered as many as 500,000, while American forces have been assisting the rebels. Now, a back and forth between Iran and President Trump. It started with the Iran leader's warning the United States that war with Iran would be the mother of all wars, a common refrain. President Trump fired back in all caps on Twitter, never, ever threaten the United States again. The Iranian foreign minister responded, "Color us unimpressed." The world heard even harsher bluster a few months ago, and Iranians have heard them, albeit more civilized ones, for more than 40 years. We've been around for millennia and seen fall of empires, including our own, which lasted more than the life of some countries. Be cautious. Now the Iranian regime is threatening countermeasures if the United States tries to block its oil exports. Let's turn to Michael O'Hanlon, Senior Fellow for Foreign Policy at the Brookings Institution, specializing in U.S. defense strategy and the use of military force. Hi, Michael.
Shepard, nice to be with you today.
Aside from the rhetoric, is there anything here?
I don't know. I mean, you mentioned the word countermeasures. To me, that's a pretty benign word. I hope that what we're seeing is a de-escalation of the rhetoric. As you well know, the real pressure, the real game now is about economic sanctions and the reimposition of those by the Trump administration. That's going to actually start to kick in about 2 weeks with the decision not to honor the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran nuclear deal. And that's where we're really hoping to put the pressure on Iran primarily. So this is probably not going to be a military confrontation. It's hard to see how that's in either side's interest. So I welcome the de-escalation of the last 1 or 2 exchanges, but I certainly get a little nervous when you hear the bluster and the brinkmanship. On balance, I don't expect it to result in anything, but it's a little bit unsettling.
We're alone outside the Iran agreement now. Can sanctions from the United States, not supported by others who were within the agreement, can they have an effect?
Yes, they can, because what we're trying to do is to force countries to choose between doing business with us and doing business with Iran. So the extent of these reimpositions of sanctions on the U.S. side really has a far broader scope than you would anticipate just by looking at the trade statistics on the United States and Iran themselves. And so, for example, the international banking system or major companies in Europe, we're trying to basically say to them, listen, you know, if you do business with Iran, you're going to be shut out of the American market. That's the real source of leverage. What I don't know is how this plays out over many months and years, but I am confident that the pain will be considerable. And already the economic projections for the Iranian GDP growth, for example, are turning negative. So I think it's going to hit Iran pretty hard in the short term.
Yeah, I read that their money is dropping in value against other currencies, and that Secretary Pompeo and President Trump are applying a lot of pressure.
You know, this is one of those debates where we have, as you well know, Shepard, a Republican-Democratic divide in the United States, whether we should have accepted that Iran deal under President Obama in the first place, whether we should have withdrawn. Frankly, there are some pretty good arguments on both sides of this issue. And so on this particular question, even if I might have been on the other side, I understand where President Trump's coming from, and I think that there is a chance that reimposing this pressure could lead to a better deal. Also, Iran kept upping the ante on its regional misbehavior in places like Syria. And, you know, defenders of the nuclear deal would say that was never part of the agreement. We didn't really try to get at that issue with the agreement. But the agreement gave Iran back $100 billion with which to make more mischief. And so I understand President Trump's thinking. It's sort of hard to do business as usual with a country that's looking for opportunities to stoke civil war in Yemen and Syria and elsewhere. So, you know, I'm rooting for the Trump policy, even if it wasn't my choice. And it may well apply some real pressure on Iran and leave us in an interesting place down the road.
Let's hope. Michael O'Hanlon, thank you.
My pleasure, Shepard.
News on the first daughter today. Ivanka Trump is pulling the plug on her fashion line. The details and what she says she'll focus on instead. That's next. Shutting down her fashion brand. Our corporate cousins at the New York Post and Page 6 broke the news in the last hour. A spokesperson for the company says restrictions to avoid conflicts of interest while the first daughter works at the White House have limited the brand's growth. That's the official line. Ivanka Trump separated herself from the company after her father became president, and she took on a role as one of her father's senior advisors. The Fox Business Network's Christina Partsinevelos is live at the White House. Hey, Christina.
Hello, Shep, and you are right. Politics versus business, politics won. Why? Because Ivanka Trump is going to focus solely on being a senior advisor to her father, President Trump. Her brand, which we're going to show you images in just a second, but the Ivanka Trump line is composed of clothing, dresses, shoes, perfume, you name it, it's under that brand. The company issued a statement on behalf of Ivanka Trump, and I'll just read it right now. After 17 months in Washington, I do not know when or if I will ever return to this business, but I do know that my focus for the foreseeable future will be the work I am doing here in Washington. So making this decision now is the only fair outcome for my team and partners. The company did launch in 2014, but sales soared in 2016, according to Forbes, up 61%. Why? Because Ivanka Trump was wearing her line of clothing and accessories throughout the campaign trail. She continued to wear her clothes during huge speeches, TV interviews, and that's when the protests and complaints started coming in that she was profiting from her role within the White House. That's when she stepped away, but she still maintained control over financials. So you were still able to see her financials. You had certain companies like Hudson's Bay Company, as well as Nordstrom, that pulled the brand from their stores, but they said it had nothing to do with the fact that Ivanka worked in the White House. It had to do with poor sales performance. And there's some other criticisms too, not only just, you know, possibly violating some ethics laws by working in the White House, but also her relationship with China. I emailed every single Fox business person and a few of your own colleagues, Shep, as well, to try to find a picture of the label. And we're going to show it up on the screen right now. This is a label of the Ivanka Trump brand. And you can see just there, it says Made in China. And there have been some concerns and criticisms that the brand, the company did get preferential treatment in China. Just this past May, they received 7 trademarks from China. The company, though, has issued today saying that they're still going to honor all of their contracts. They're still going to follow through with that, so you still should see the brand in certain stores like Lord & Taylor, Bloomingdale's. And the company says the winding down has nothing to do with poor sales. Shep?
Christina Partsinevelos live in the briefing room. Thank you. There's word North Korea is starting to dismantle a missile test site. And President Trump says it's proof that talks with Pyongyang are on the right track. But Pyongyang called that not a missile testing site, launched a satellite into near orbit. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says he wants inspectors there to see what's going on firsthand.
We've seen the open press reporting about the missile engine test site. It'd be entirely consistent with the commitment that Chairman Kim made to President Trump when the two of them were in Singapore together. We've been pressing for there to be inspectors on the ground when that engine test facility is dismantled, consistent with Chairman Kim's commitment. And I'll leave it at that for this morning.
Well, just weeks ago, other satellite images appeared to show a much different picture from a different site. There, North Korea was expanding a ballistic missile plant, not scaling back at all. the national security correspondent Jennifer Griffin with the news. She's live at the Pentagon. What are you hearing from the Pentagon about these satellite images, Jen?
Well, Shepard, U.S. officials who have reviewed similar satellite footage confirmed to Fox North Korea has taken some steps to dismantle the launch site and welcome the development, but caution any changes could be reversed. President Trump praised the moves by North Korea while speaking before the veterans of foreign wars in Missouri.
We're also pursuing the denuclearization of North Korea and a new future of prosperity, security, and peace on the Korean Peninsula and all of Asia. New images just today show that North Korea has begun the process of dismantling a key missile site, and we appreciate that. We had a fantastic meeting with Chairman Kim, and it seems to be going very well.
They need to completely, fully denuclearize. That's the steps that Chairman Kim committed to and that the world has demanded through UN Security Council resolutions. It's that straightforward.
Much like the dismantling of the nuclear test site in May, there were no outside expert observers present for the dismantling of this test site. No real way to verify what is happening in North Korea. A reminder, too, Shep, that North Korea promised Secretary of State Pompeo to return the remains of U.S. war dead, but have yet to do so. Shepard.
Jennifer, evidence that the Chinese or someone is helping the North Koreans cheat the sanctions?
Well, gasoline prices in North Korea have nearly fallen in half since late March. That, according to an analysis by the Reuters news agency, and suggests that somehow North Korea is finding a way to evade sanctions. Many suggest that China may be the culprit as it ramps up a trade war with the U.S. China may be loosening sanctions, allowing its client state some relief as it negotiates with the U.S. Ambassador Nikki Haley, standing next to Secretary of State Pompeo at the UN in New York on Friday, chastised China and Russia for helping North Korea break UN sanctions and smuggle oil into North Korea.
We put pressure today on China and Russia to abide and be good helpers through this situation and to help us continue with denuclearization.
The UN Security Council passed a resolution in December banning nearly 90% of refined petroleum exports to North Korea, a way to squeeze North Korea and punish it for its nuclear program and missile tests. Now it seems North Korea is finding a way around those sanctions, Shep.
Secretary Mattis spoke today at a somewhat rare news conference. What did he say about working with Russia on Syria?
Well, he was out at Stanford with Secretary of State Pompeo meeting with their Australian counterparts. He was asked about whether the U.S. military was prepared to work on the ground in Syria with Russia. That suggestion, of course, came out of that 2-hour meeting between President Trump and Vladimir Putin in Helsinki. Secretary Mattis was very clear that right now the U.S. military deconflicts with the Russians. They have a hotline to do so, but they do not coordinate their actions on the ground with the Russians. He said that he has no orders right now or suggestion from Secretary of State Pompeo or President Trump to do so. In fact, the head of CENTCOM, General Joseph Votel, suggested in an interview this weekend while traveling overseas that it would give him pause to work with the Russians on the ground. And today we heard from Russia's foreign ministry trying to drive a wedge between the president and his generals, suggesting that General Votel may be speaking out of turn and maybe undermining President Trump's position. But that is certainly not the message we're hearing from Secretary Mattis and others. They believe it would be very risky to work with the Russians on the ground in Syria. Shep.
Jennifer, thank you. North Korea developments now. Gordon Chang is here, author of Nuclear Showdown, North Korea Takes on the World. He's also a foreign affairs journalist. Gordon, good to see you.
Thanks, Shep.
Is there any evidence, any at all, that the North Koreans are beginning the process of denuclearizing?
Not yet. What we've seen in a recent
weeks, when you say not yet, as if you think they might.
They might, and that really depends on whether Trump is really willing to put pressure on that.
You've sat in this studio with me for years, and you have told me the same thing for years and years. You've said they have one crop, they have one voice in the world. It is through nuclear. Without it, they have nothing. So you're telling me that you think there's a chance now they might be on the road to denuclearization?
Well, what I'm saying is President Trump is willing to use all the elements of American power. He can do that even short of the use of force. But Shep, going back to your original question, no, there's no evidence that the North Koreans have started on the path of denuclearization. We have seen all of those leaked intelligence reports saying that they're ramping up production of fissile material, which is really the most important. We saw work on the cooling system of their 5-megawatt reactor at Yongbin. That has no peaceful purposes whatsoever. And all of these stories about the Sohae site that we've just heard in the last 24 hours, this is not a missile site, despite what President Trump said. This is a rocket site. And
an engine test site as well.
Engine test site for liquid fuel missiles. Now, liquid fuel is really old technology. It is true that North Korea's ICBMs, the 3 that they launched, use liquid fuel, but those really are not threats because it takes a long time to, those missiles will stay on the ground for at least a half hour while they're being fueled. We can kill them. What we're worried about are the solid fuel missiles, and there's no evidence that the North Koreans have started to take apart those sites.
Under President Bush the 41st, Clinton, Bush the 43rd, and Obama, what the North Koreans were trying to do was delay so that they could get fully nuclearized, so that they could hit the United States mainland, so that they would have power in the world. Is there anything to indicate that this is anything other than another in a series of delay tactics?
Yeah, I think that this is delay. And you got to remember that this was sort of the side agreement to the June 12th summit that they would take apart Sohae. But the other thing is that President Trump at that summit gave a side promise on our side, which was to suspend the joint military exercises, which really was much more important than taking apart a few parts of Sohae.
And did that? And we suspended those games.
Yes, and this is.
But I'm not sure who approved that. But maybe the president could do that unilaterally.
Well, he could do it unilaterally. He's the commander in chief, and he did not consult the military on this. If he did,
he didn't consult the South Koreans either.
He didn't consult the South Koreans.
He didn't even tell them.
No, everyone was surprised by this. And a lot of people were shocked at that June 12th press conference after the summit when President Trump says, oh, I'm going to call them war games, which is what the North Koreans call them. These are joint exercises. They're defensive in nature. President Trump did not get a corresponding promise from the North Koreans to suspend their exercises, which means that their summer training cycle will go forward. Our Ulchi Freedom Guardian exercises also at the same time, they're not going forward. Our readiness will decline. Now we can.
And who suggested to the president that he suspend the not war games?
Yeah,
the rehearsals, if you will, on the peninsula. Who suggested that?
Well, there is reporting, not confirmed, but there is reporting that President Trump got this suggestion from Vladimir Putin. I actually think
it would certainly be in the Russians' interest.
It would be in the Russians' interest. I think he actually got it from Xi Jinping. That makes much more sense. The Chinese are much more involved in the exercise, much more concerned about them than the Russians. But nonetheless, President Trump did not consult the U.S. military. He did not consult the South Koreans. And what this means is that over time, we are going to have a hollowed-out alliance. We can always beat the North Koreans if they invade the South, but at much greater civilian casualties and much greater casualties to our own personnel.
You've said here 1 million in the first wave killed.
Could be. You know, they use nukes, chemical and biological agents. You remember Seoul is about 25 or so million people. It's within, you know, a range of 30, 35 miles from the demilitarized zone, which separates the two Koreas. So therefore, this is just a big kill zone for the North Koreans. And we know that they can do that with their forward deployed artillery, 14,300 tubes just north of the DMZ. And depends what they put in those tubes, this could really be the horrific slaughter.
Gordon Chang, thank you as always. Good to see you.
Thanks, Shep.
A Republican congressman is calling for a carbon tax to help fight climate change. And he's facing pushback from his members of